For any questions you may have for the panel.
I want to thank each one of you for coming and spending your time today. And Chairman Cole, appreciate you asking about that. I was one of the ones that questioned about the manager's amendment, and Chairman Graves addressed some of it. We got something in writing, so thank you for that. Three quick questions. On the trust fund, was there much discussion on the way the money was spent? As of 21, you got a $14 billion surplus. And the purpose of the trust fund is to fund, as y'all know, infrastructure, improvements, research. So my question is, was there much discussion on that? Who determines where the money, how that money is spent, I guess is the question I had.
Well, yeah, it's formula. It's formula dollars. And we do have, you know, one of the nice things about transportation is we still have true trust funds. We still have silos of dollars, and we have money in the Aviation Trust Fund. So if you go back in history and you look at the reason why the trust funds were created and why we have an AIP program, which is where a lot of that money goes to, and it's an airport improvement program, it was to improve small and medium-sized airports, to get general aviation off of the big airports because it creates more congestion. If you've got a Piper Cub sitting there and a 747's waiting on that Cub to take off, it creates problems. So we created this program years ago, back in the 70s, to have robust general aviation community, get those aircraft off of the big airports. Well, it's languished. We've been spending about and I'm going to specifically speak to AIP, about $3.35 billion on AIP programs in all of our districts. And it's been this flat for the last 20 years. And the main reason for that increase is to use that money and to improve more airports. Now, one of the things that we do, which I think is interesting, traditionally we've funded the FAA out of the trust fund at about 90%. The rest came from general revenue. Our bill increases that to at least 98% funded through, and that's user fees. You know, that's what we pay in as a result of flying, and it's fuel taxes is what it is. And so we're raising that to 98%, to at least 98% to fund FAA. And so I think that's a great thing. We're taking it out of general revenue and making sure that it is truly a user-funded system. As far as, you know, how the money gets spent, most of it's formula dollars. Like, for instance, with AIP, it's determined on different states do it different ways. Some states pass the money out themselves. Some states allow that money to flow right through to airports, and they get a certain amount of money each year. They can add that up over time so that they have a little bit bigger. I think over 4 years, you can add that up and be able to do a little bit bigger project, whatever the case may be. So it's mostly through formula dollars when it comes to the funding.
And it applies equally per the states.
Yeah. But every state, again, they all do it a little bit differently. Some of them, the money flows direct. Some of them goes to the state, and then the state divvies it out. You have block grant states. You have non-block grant states.
Right. Who makes the formulas?
Who makes what?
Who makes the formulas on how the money is distributed? I've heard some complaints that and they run a pretty good, for a trust fund to have $14 billion in it is interesting. And I've heard the complaints that, you know, you're a pilot, so goes airlines, both private and public. So goes the economy in a lot of ways, but it's the maintenance that they're not happy with, or I guess now they're questioning the funding of and how that's decided.
You mean between like large airports versus?
Correct.
Well, you know, again, it goes back to the history. The airlines wanted GA off the big airports so that they quit screwing up and creating congestion at the big airports. That's the reason why we have the AIP program to begin with, is so that we fund those smaller airports and we get GA off of the big airports. So, you know, now they're saying we want that money back, and I guess that means with it you're going to have more GA traffic at large airports, which would be a disaster. So I find it fascinating that you have some, you know, actually saying that. And in fact, with this increase, the large airports are going to see an increase as well, because we're going to $4 billion a year. They're going to see an increase in what they get.
But as far as who controls the formulas, is that a committee? Is that who would make up?
Just my understanding of AIP is that it's based on employments in and out of an airport. That's kind of the first driver of the dollars.
It's graduated.
Yeah, and then the second thing I make about the increase from 335 to 4 billion that we put in the bill, about 70% of that is focused for GA as opposed to 70-30. The current at 335, it's something like 67-33 for the larger airports. Okay. So we're actually the increment is going to be slighted, leaning towards more GA money, which is actually going to bring down the overall to somewhere in the 60-40 range or something for large to small.
Well, you might want to just ask. You haven't got a lot of influence. Ask the questions about that because, and I don't know, like you're saying, Chairman, I don't know whether it's justified or not. I know it's been talked about for a number of years.
There are grants out there too available that are outside of AIP that are, I mean, some airports, it's just what they need in terms of a new runway or whatever is just going to be astronomical. And they do those grants much like the Highway Department does, or that DOT does when establishing.
All right, and finally on the your disabilities, I forget what you called it, but it's y'all extended it or enhanced that. Is that, and the reason I'm asking the question is, we're seeing, and Sam, you're talking about the Piper holding up a 747. We're seeing customers who are claiming disabilities. We had one the other day that claimed she was overweight, would not get out of the aisle seat, said she would not move. There's nothing that held the airplane up for an hour. What? Was that addressed in this bill? I mean, is this codifying, or I guess making that easy for somebody to claim a disability of being overweight? Another one said he had a hurt leg, it wasn't going to move, and I don't know who makes the call.
In a lot of cases, the airlines make that call, and it's a nightmare. Believe me, it's a nightmare. The same thing, you get into the same thing with service animals. I remember we used to have TWA headquartered in the state of Missouri. And I remember TWA had a big problem because a lady brought a service pony on board. And the service pony obviously took up 2 seats and sat there and it defecated all over the airplane. And it was a problem. And they had to do something. But the airlines, they for the most part set those rules. There are guidelines that the FAA puts out there, but it's hard to. I mean, that's a rock and a hard place, to be quite honest with you, and it's not.
Well, I would ask your committee to.
And you may.
Well, yeah, it's in Title VII of the bill addressed. This is where some of these things are addressed. What we're really trying to focus on is, well, build upon what our former colleague Jim Langevin had introduced last year from Rhode Island. And then we had a bipartisan group of members take up that mantle to introduce these bits of legislation, largely focused on folks who are wheelchair bound or have to use mobility aids, and as opposed to addressing the issue you're talking about specifically, the sections where the improvements we are talking about have to largely focus on wheelchairs, how wheelchairs are treated, how they're stored, how they're put in cargo holds, how the customer is protected. If that wheelchair is damaged, and then asking the FAA to look at whether or not we can actually have people get their wheelchairs on the plane themselves as well. So kind of looking at the future a little bit. So that's more of the focus of the language that we put in the bill as opposed to this particular issue that you brought up.
It's more general.
Well, what I see is that the stewardesses and the personnel there are scared to do anything. And it's tremendous. And you're right. People are bringing dogs, cats, animals. They had 4 cats on the plane I had today. And then, so any letter that y'all could do, backing up the airlines and not letting them shy away, it's holding up. No wonder the delays are there. And that's just one of the issues. Y'all's committee could do it, and I would just request you to at least back them up on enforcing it, because they act like their hands are tied. We sit there. So anyway, thank you all for your testimony. I yield back.
Thank you. Gentlelady from Pennsylvania is recognized for any questions she may have for the panel.
Thank you, Chairman Cole, and thank you to all of those who are testifying today. Really just thrilled with the bipartisan work that you've put into this bill to produce a clean bill with full support from the committee.